I am Timothy, 60 years old. For 22 years, I worked double shifts as a mechanic, keeping the grease under my fingernails so my son could walk alongside the wealthy elite of Connecticut. That afternoon, the university parking lot was packed with shiny brand-new luxury sedans bought by rich parents. But my eyes were fixed on the heavy tarp in the corner. When my son finally walked out arm in arm with his designer-wearing girlfriend, my heart swelled. I stepped forward in my faded, worn-out suit and proudly pulled the tarp away, revealing my graduation gift, a classic Ford Mustang ShelbyGT500. I had spent years preserving its original engine, leaving the natural patina, the surface rust intact. To a collector, it was a rare masterpiece, but his girlfriend immediately stepped back, covering her nose in exaggerated disgust as a mocking smirk crossed her face. My son's face flushed red, not with joy, but with intense embarrassment. Pressured by her reaction and his own obsession with appearances, he didn't even look at the keys in my hand. "What the hell is this?" he sneered, his voice loud enough to turn heads. "You expect me to drive this rusty piece of trash around Greenwich? It's worthless. Just like you." Without another word, he turned his back on me, got into a friend's pristine sports car, and sped off, leaving me standing alone next to a masterpiece he was too blind to see. If you want to know how this worthless trash ended up selling for $340,000 at a high-end auction, and exactly what happened when my arrogant son came crawling back for the money, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. You absolutely do not want to miss how this story ends. The roar of the V8 engine echoed along the empty highway, pulling me deep into a tangled mess of thoughts on the drive back to my old garage in Greenwich. I gripped the wooden steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, letting the raw mechanical vibrations ground my scattered mind. Pulling into the dimly lit workspace, I finally cut the ignition. The sudden, heavy silence felt suffocating. Dust particles danced slowly in the pale beams of streetlights, filtering through the high industrial windows. I stepped out of the cabin, inhaling the deeply familiar scent of motor oil gasoline and aged vinyl. Instead of pacing the concrete floor in a blind rage or throwing wrenches across the room, I found myself moving slowly toward the passenger side. I opened the heavy metal door and traced my calloused fingers along the worn leather seat. My mind drifted back to a much simpler era. I clearly saw my son Austin as a 5-year-old boy sitting right there. His tiny hands used to grip the dashboard in pure, unadulterated excitement. His bright eyes would widen, and a brilliant, unrestrained laugh would burst from his chest every time I revved the engine. Back then, he did not care about luxury brand social status or the rusted patina on the exterior. He only cared that we were together, sharing a secret world under the hood of an American legend. I had sacrificed countless weekends, working grueling double shifts and skipping meals just to keep this exact machine authentic for his future. My hand dropped away from the cold leather. That innocent, loving boy was truly gone. The harsh reality settled into my bones like a bitter winter chill. The young man who now bore the name Austin had been entirely swallowed by absolute vanity. The superficial, materialistic lifestyle of Connecticut's elite had hollowed him out completely, leaving behind a cold stranger who measured a man's entire worth by the price tag on his clothes. He and his girlfriend Penelope belonged entirely to a shallow world built on fake appearances, utterly disconnected from the blood, sweat, and sacrifice that had paved their comfortable way. A profound, heavy sorrow replaced the initial sting of his cruel rejection. I walked over to my weathered metal workbench, picking up a frayed shop rag to wipe the grime off my hands. I was not acting out of petty spite. There was no fiery impulse to retaliate against him. This was a quiet, devastating awakening. I looked at the dark green Shelby resting silently in the shadows. Keeping it here would only serve as a constant rotting monument to my failed fatherhood. Selling this mechanical masterpiece meant finally severing the invisible chain tying me to a foolish delusion. I was letting go of the desperate hope that my son would ever understand the actual value of hard work. I reached for the heavy landline phone mounted on the cold concrete wall. My fingers were completely steady as I dialed the direct number of the most reputable classic car appraiser on the East Coast. The long, ringing tone echoed sharply in my ear. It was finally time to bury the past. On Tuesday morning, a specialized transport truck pulled up in front of my house, bringing 2 technicians who carried themselves with a calm, disciplined demeanor. They stepped into the dimly lit garage, wearing crisp uniforms, carrying heavy Pelican cases filled with diagnostic equipment. There was no theatrical gasping or unnecessary small talk when they saw the dark green Ford Mustang ShelbyGT500. They simply nodded in greeting, set up a portable workstation on a folding table, and immediately went to work. The atmosphere felt entirely clinical, stripped of any emotional weight, operating strictly on mechanical facts and historical data. The lead appraiser pulled out a high-powered inspection flashlight and a digital borescope. He slid underneath the front chassis, while his partner opened a laptop to access the National Classic Car Registry database. I stood silently by the workbench, watching them dissect the machine I had preserved for over 2 decades. The technician called out alphanumeric codes etched into the cast-iron engine block. The man at the laptop typed rapidly scanning archival manufacturing records. They verified the transmission housing codes, the rear axle tags, and the original door data plates, ensuring no discrepancy existed. The casting dates align perfectly, the man under the car stated in a flat, professional tone. He rolled out from under the chassis, wiping old grease from his protective glove. He then carefully examined the exterior panels using a specialized paint thickness meter. He ran his fingers over the faded paint and the areas of surface oxidation. Looking directly at me with a completely neutral expression, he explained that in the current high-end collector market, this specific type of natural wear is highly coveted. The patina is undeniable historical proof of authenticity, verifying the vehicle has survived completely, untouched, and unrestored. It is a true survivor, he concluded quietly. Every single component matches factory records. It is a fully documented matching numbers vehicle. He walked over to his portable workstation and printed a detailed preliminary appraisal report. Attaching the document to a heavy clipboard, he handed it to me. His voice remained steady and purely transactional as he delivered the final verdict. Based on recent auction results for untouched models, they estimated the vehicle would fetch between $280,000 and $320,000. I held the clipboard, feeling the weight of the paper in my calloused hands. That massive sum of money represented years of my quiet sacrifice, now converted into cold, hard market value. I did not hesitate. I did not ask for a single moment to think it over. I simply reached into my worn shirt pocket, pulled out my own pen, and signed the auction authorization contract with one swift, decisive stroke. The lead technician gave a curt nod, signaling his partner to start the heavy electric winch. The steel cables slowly pulled the car inside the dark trailer. High-intensity spotlights hit the dark green paint of the Mustang on the rotating platform, turning it into the absolute focal point of the packed auction hall. The prestigious venue hummed with a tense electric energy. Wealthy collectors and seasoned investors filled the plush velvet seats, their eyes locked intently on the classic American muscle car. The professional auctioneer stood at the polished wooden podium, his voice sharp and rhythmic as he masterfully commanded the room. He opened the intense bidding war at $200,000. Almost instantly, a numbered paddle shot up from the third row. Another eager bidder raised a hand near the center aisle. The numbers climbed with dizzying speed, echoing through the state-of-the-art sound system. 250,000. 280,000. The auctioneer fired off the rapid increments, without taking a single breath, seamlessly managing the fierce competition between an older gentleman in the front row and an anonymous telephone buyer. The atmosphere grew thick with anticipation as the price confidently crossed the 300,000 mark. Finally, the large room fell completely silent. The auctioneer called out the final warning, scanning the wealthy crowd one last time. His heavy wooden gavel slammed down against the sounding block with a resounding crack. Sold to the telephone bidder for $340,000. A massive wave of enthusiastic applause instantly erupted from the sophisticated audience. People turned to admire the magnificent machine as it was slowly driven off the main stage. Sitting entirely alone in the dimly lit back row, I watched the entire spectacle unfold without moving a single muscle. My inner world was chillingly quiet. There was absolutely no joy coursing through my veins. No triumphant sense of vindication warmed my tired heart. Instead, a deeply bitter smile slowly crept onto my face as the crushing weight of reality finally settled over me. That staggering, life-changing sum of money definitively proved that I was absolutely right about the vehicle. It officially validated every single hour I had spent meticulously preserving that engine, and confirmed the true, undeniable value of my grueling physical labor. Yet that fortune felt hollow in my hands. I stared blankly at the empty space on the brightly lit stage, realizing with agonizing clarity that $340,000 could never buy back my son's respect. The monumental auction price did not symbolize a grand personal victory. Instead, it served as a glaring, blinding spotlight, exposing my ultimate failure in raising Austin. I had successfully protected a mechanical piece of history from rusting away, but I had completely failed to protect my own flesh and blood from the corrosive, destructive influence of superficial greed. The wealthy attendees mingled and celebrated their expensive acquisitions, completely unaware of the quiet tragedy unfolding in the back of the room. I slowly stood up from my seat, buttoned my faded jacket, and walked straight toward the administrative office to finalize the binding transfer paperwork. The massive sum of money after taxes and commission fees was transferred directly into my bank account exactly 1 week later. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the glowing laptop screen, quietly processing the digital numbers that represented a lifetime of hard physical labor. The peaceful afternoon was suddenly shattered by the sharp ring of my cell phone. The caller ID flashed my son's name. A heavy silence filled the room as I watched the screen blink. I finally swiped the button and lifted the device to my ear without speaking a single word to him. "Dad." "Hey, it is Austin." His voice came through the speaker, dripping with an unnatural, sugary warmth I had not heard in years. "Listen, I just saw this crazy article in an automotive magazine online. They were talking about a record-breaking auction for a vintage Shelby. It really made me think of you." He paused, waiting for a reaction I strictly refused to give. Desperately filling the dead air, his tone shifted into a rehearsed pitch of deep remorse. "Dad, I've been doing a lot of thinking lately. I am so incredibly sorry about how I acted last month. I was completely overwhelmed by the stress of finals and the intense peer pressure from Penelope and my friends. I was just trying to act tough. That was not the real me. I really want to come over this weekend, just the two of us to cook dinner and properly fix things between us." I closed my eyes, listening closely to his breathing. There was absolutely no genuine guilt in his carefully chosen words. It was only the calculated scramble of a young man realizing he had just thrown away a winning lottery ticket. Decades of reading people taught me exactly how to spot a hustler. He did not mention the cash directly, but pure greed vibrated through every single syllable of his fake apology. He was not mourning a fractured relationship with his father. He was merely mourning his lost access to a massive financial windfall. The harsh realization permanently stripped away any lingering illusions I held about his true character. His core values were fundamentally corrupted and completely unchangeable. "I'm busy," I replied in a flat, emotionless tone, before abruptly ending the call. The silence returned to my kitchen feeling entirely liberating. I did not waste another second dwelling on his transparent performance. I immediately picked up the phone again and dialed the direct line of my estate attorney. When the lawyer answered, my instructions were absolute and completely devoid of hesitation. I ordered a comprehensive revision of my last will and testament. I legally and permanently stripped Austin of any future inheritance, ensuring not a single penny of my newly acquired wealth would ever reach his greedy, grasping hands. The clink of a teacup touching the glass table cut through the silence of the living room as Austin and Penelope walked in precisely on schedule. They did not kick the door down or shout like irrational children. Instead, they carried themselves with a cold, calculated arrogance, dressing in sharp business attire, as if they were attending a corporate board meeting. Penelope crossed her legs elegantly on my vintage sofa, while Austin confidently pulled a thick legal document from his leather briefcase. He slid the crisp white papers across the smooth glass surface toward me. His lawyer had drafted a formal demand letter claiming the classic car was a publicly announced graduation gift. According to their ridiculous legal theory, a verbal contract had been established in front of witnesses, meaning the $340,000 from the auction legally belonged to him. Penelope chimed in with a condescending tone, suggesting I should just hand over the funds quietly so they could secure the down payment on their new Greenwich estate without dragging my name through a messy court battle. I did not raise my voice or show a single ounce of intimidation. I calmly picked up my porcelain teacup, took a slow sip, and set it aside. Opening the single drawer of my coffee table, I pulled out a slender manila folder and dropped it heavily onto the legal threat. I slid out the original vehicle registration and the official title certificate. The faded government documents clearly displayed my full name as the sole legal owner, dated over 2 decades before Austin even learned how to drive. There was absolutely no signed transfer of ownership, no deed of gift, and no legally binding paperwork proving the vehicle ever belonged to anyone else. Then I presented the final, undeniable piece of evidence. I placed a high-quality color printout right on top of their lawyer's letter. It was a certified transcript and a screenshot of the vicious text message Austin had sent his friends that very same afternoon, boasting about rejecting my offering. The bold text clearly read that he proudly refused to accept the worthless piece of rusty trash. I looked directly into his suddenly pale face and explained the basic principles of property law in a flat, icy tone. A gift must be willfully accepted to complete a legal transfer. By loudly and publicly rejecting the item, he instantly nullified any hypothetical verbal contract. The property remained entirely mine to sell, burn, or destroy as I saw fit. The smug confidence instantly drained from Penelope's heavily contoured face. Austin opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. His eyes darted frantically between the unarguable legal title and his own documented words of sheer ungratefulness. The airtight legal logic left them completely paralyzed, trapping them in a suffocating web of their own making. Their pathetic greed was expertly dismantled. I stood up from my armchair, straightened my posture, and calmly instructed them to find the exit. The legal file Austin's lawyer sent lay untouched on my coffee table, withdrawn by a panicked phone call from their own office, before I even had the chance to open it. The junior attorney had hastily reviewed the incontrovertible proof of ownership and immediately dropped the predictably unwinnable case, leaving my son completely defenseless against his own catastrophic financial decisions. The crushing consequences of his deeply superficial lifestyle did not arrive with dramatic thunderstorms or loud police sirens. They materialized with cold, unforgiving bureaucratic efficiency. Austin had meticulously built a fragile house of cards in Greenwich, funding his arrogant facade with exorbitant high-interest loans and recklessly maxed-out credit lines. He had foolishly banked his entire future on the arrogant assumption that my wealth would seamlessly bail him out. When those funds permanently vanished beyond his reach, reality struck with devastating precision. The lending institution swiftly initiated aggressive collection protocols. Unsympathetic recovery agents arrived unannounced at his upscale residential complex, publicly towing away the pristine sports car he had so proudly flaunted around the wealthy neighborhood. Shortly after that humiliating spectacle, a formal eviction notice was taped firmly to the front door of his luxury apartment. Faced with absolute financial ruin, the remaining illusion of his perfect life instantly shattered. Penelope, acting entirely true to her inherently parasitic nature, did not stay a moment longer to offer any emotional support. The very second she realized the massive financial windfall was a mere mirage, and the premium credit cards were universally declined, her supposed loyalty vanished into thin air. She quietly packed her extensive collection of designer luggage and walked out the door without shedding a single tear, permanently abandoning him to face his monumental debts entirely alone. Stripped completely of his arrogant pride, his expensive possessions, and his shallow companion Austin was finally pushed to the absolute brink of human despair. Late that Tuesday evening, my cell phone illuminated the darkened living room. His name flashed desperately across the glowing digital screen. I stood completely still beside my neatly packed suitcases, watching the device vibrate silently against the polished wooden floorboards. I did not pick it up to scream at him or demand a pathetic apology. I did not even bother pressing the button to electronically block his number. I simply watched the bright screen ring repeatedly until it finally went black, returning the quiet room to absolute darkness. Early the next morning, I loaded my remaining belongings into my truck and permanently drove out of Connecticut, heading toward a peaceful new property in a distant Midwestern state. I left no forwarding address and absolutely no explanation behind. That profound, suffocating silence became my final definitive answer. It was a remarkably cold, invisible, and agonizingly permanent sentence, forcing a deeply ungrateful son to live the rest of his ruined life, listening only to the devastating echoes of his own colossal mistakes.